My name's Adele Onyango, and welcome to another episode of Legally Clueless. No, seriously, I have no clue what I'm doing, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Hey you, welcome to episode 253 of Legally Clueless. Thank you so much for rocking with this podcast. OG members, I've got nothing but love for you. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome to the family. Audio episodes like this go out every single Monday, and you can stream them literally everywhere you find podcasts on. You can also listen to us if you're in Kenya or across East Africa on Trace FM every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Just go to traceradio.co.ke to stream. Check out our Instagram. That's where we have a lot of action on social media. We're at Legally Clueless Africa. That's also our TikTok. Make sure you head over to our website, legallycluelessafrica.com, to watch the 4 seasons of our video series, our tour series, and keep updated with our 2024 calendar of events that goes up later this week. We are introducing not only our group therapy sessions, which we did last year, but we have wellness talks coming up that I'm super excited about. And we also have workshops for those of you who want to learn how to build your own digital media or digital shows. Okay, let's get back to this episode. This is what is coming up.
And I would hear things like, as a woman, if you become very well educated, then you will not get married. I would hear things like, ambition does not look good on a woman. I would hear things like, men don't like women who maybe wear makeup. I would hear things like, if you are too ambitious, then you will scare the men away. It made me subconsciously hate being a woman.
That is Faith. Her story's coming up a little later in the episode. Actually, not too later. Literally after the song of the week, which this week, my goodness, I have been playing this song over and over. And it's probably one of the only songs by this particular artist that I have on replay. I don't know. I think maybe I'm in that zone of just like F society and their weird expectations and definitions. So the song is by Ayra Starr, and the name of the song is Ashe. I really dig it. I really dig this song. I dig the message. I'm just like, yes, I feel like this is the energy we need to be jumping into the new year with. So if you haven't heard it, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Make sure you check it out. Right now, though, I have so much to say after Faith's story. So we're just going to jump into her story first. And she's part of our community. She listens to Legally Clueless, and she filled out our storyteller form. We got in touch with her, set up a date to record her story, and got it done. And she shares her story about moving from a point in her life where she hated being a woman to unlearning the expectations and definitions that society places on women. 100 African stories on Legally Clueless. Stories from Africa.
My name is Nasieku. I come from Kenya. I am a 27-year-old proud Kenyan lady. I have been born and raised in Eldoret. Nasieku is a maiden name of mine, which comes from the Maasai tribe. I choose to use the name Nasieku in this story and currently in my young adulthood life, because I realized that a lot of my upbringing, this name did not get light. I was always using my first name and my surname. So Nasieku is a name that means someone who did not, the mom did not labor as much before they came to this world. Now, I was brought up in Eldoret, born and raised there. I was brought up in a very communal estate, and this was before the post-election violence that we had in the country. A very loving home and present parents. I was the middle child out of 5 kids, right in the middle. I have 2 brothers, I have 2 sisters. We were brought up in a very cozy home, very supportive. Really, I would say my childhood was a good one. I can say I was an opinionated child, very confident and very outspoken. And it was sort of a way of me trying to gain attention. I know every middle child can relate to trying to seek for attention, from the parents or even just from your siblings. And this made my mom once in a while call me quote unquote rough child. So sometimes she would be like, "You're too rough for a girl. Why are you doing this? Why are you always teasing your brother, fighting with your brother. That is not how girls usually are. And also with the quote unquote rough bit of it, back then we used to have this tree outside our home, which was, I think it was the lacquer's fruit. And I remember myself quite a number of times up in that tree looking for the fruits up there, or sometimes just chilling, or sometimes just adventuring. I was very curious. At the time, I would be told as a girl, you're not supposed to be climbing trees. Why are you so rough and all these things? But again, I did not take these things as an insult. I was just like, see, this is my family. They know me. I am a daddy's girl. And one of the things that was so, it was like an unwritten rule, was that it was books before boys. And I think as a kid, looking back, I always used to wonder, if it is books before boys, then where is my time? Because now I'm focusing on books, and then after focusing on books, maybe then I would be focusing on boys. And I always wondered, where was my time? I grew up in a very religious setting, and some of the things that I learned as a young girl were and I would say the way it was portrayed in the religious book was the uncleanliness of a woman while referring to the menstrual cycle. Another thing was that women sort of were the quote unquote helper. And so as a young child, these are things that I took very literally as they were. And so these are some of the things that shaped how I grew up and how I saw myself as a woman. As a kid, I would say there were three sides to me. So there was this rough side that I've talked about, the fights with my bro and the teasing and the climbing trees. But there was this other girly side of me that loved organizing, whether it was my room, whether it was my desk back at school. I loved flowers. I still do love flowers. My elder sister and I would always play with our dolls and the kitchen sets and play little house things. I loved smelling nice. I loved nice, little, cute things. So that was the girly side of me. And then there was this third side of me where I would say an identity side, where I really struggled to reconcile my ambition with societal expectations. Now, as I said, I was brought up in a very communal estate. So we were like one big family. And so sometimes you would hear people talking about certain things. And given that I was very ambitious from a very young age, I struggled to reconcile these ambitions with what these people were talking about when it came to women. Now, when it comes to how I was brought up in a highly patriarchal society, and I would hear things like, as a woman, if you become very well educated, then you will not get married. I would hear things like ambition does not look good on a woman. I would hear things like men don't like women who maybe wear makeup. Men like women who are natural. I would hear things like if you are too ambitious, then you will scare the men away. Sometimes I would hear things like women are too emotional, and it was meant like in a way to portray women as weak. And so these are things that slowly by slowly, I think subconsciously I picked up a lot of the societal expectations, and I was not so sure how this coincided with my ambition and my vision. As a young girl, I had this ambition. I had foreseen my life up to age 24. Yeah, so I know it was sort of a narrow vision, but given the place that I grew up in, I will take the win as just having the ambition. So I was to go to school, and then by 24 I would get married, and I had only seen my life up to 24. And so sometimes it would conflict. I was internally conflicted because I had this ambition that I was working towards. So I was supposed to go to school, then after school get a job, be a career woman, and then get married. And society is here telling me that when you become too educated, you will scare men away, or when you become too ambitious, you will not get married. All those kinds of things that I was hearing. And so it took really some time for me to it was really a tough kind of internal conflict, trying to, because I want to get married in the long run. But again, they say that And I also want to go to school and be a career woman. But they say that if now I go to school, get educated, then I won't be married. So where am I? Now, at around 14 or between 14 and 16, I would say, at this time, my the elder siblings, one was in school, in boarding school, the other one had already moved out. And so this was a time for when me and my younger bro really bonded. So the younger sibling between me and her is 10 years, so she was still a baby at this time. And so my bro and I, during this time of my life, got to be friends and we got to bond a lot. And one day he told me that he thinks that I am a feminist. When he said these words, I took them as an insult because the way I viewed feminism at that time related to some of the articles maybe that I'd read or some of the stories that I had had out here. The only picture that would come in my mind was the articles that maybe were talking about, people who were advocating for their armpit hair to be for, I mean, women who are advocating for their armpit hair to be let to grow, or maybe some of them were maybe protesting, the no bras sort of thing. And I did not relate because I have been brought up in a morally strict background. So sometimes I was like, why would you be protesting about the armpit hair or, wearing bras and all these things? It made no sense to me at all. So when my bro called me a feminist, I honestly took it as an insult because that is what I thought feminism was, according to what I had consumed at that time and according to what I thought it was. The other side of it was that I saw feminism as being centered around men and then having now the women at the periphery. So hearing words like, what a man can do, a woman can do better. The way I saw it then was that we are using the man as our benchmark. And then now we realize that we can do better. So I felt like it was really centered around men. Some of the other activisms that were going on was something like men should stop maybe objectifying us as women. And I saw the benefits of it and all the things that came with it. But one of the things that I did not really understand is why this was centered around men. If it was feminism, the way I had thought was that maybe it should have been the other way around, so that the woman is at the center and then the man is at the periphery. But at the time, I felt like it was really centered around men. Subconsciously, having grown up in this patriarchal society and then also having this kind of idea, the one that I had of feminism, it made me subconsciously hate being a woman. And I say subconsciously because right now I'm telling this story and looking back now that I have the whole picture, then I subconsciously hated being a woman. And so I started working towards proving that I am not weak, because society and all these ideologies that I had picked up that was somehow twisted had made me think that a woman was a weak person or a woman was not fit to be at the center. I mean, if you are not fit to be at the center of your own life, then what are you fit to be? So I subconsciously hated being a woman. And so this translated in how I started showing up and working towards trying to prove to anyone around me, and mostly the men, all the boys my age, that I was not weak, that I also could be just like them. I think one of the things that really came naturally to me in my younger years was academic excellence, and I was also an exemplary leader right from the beginning of my school life. So these are two things that came naturally to me. But now, once I started internalizing this twisted way of looking at being a woman, at that time, a girl, I started competing with the boys. And not to prove that I am intellectually okay or like I have this IQ or I can do this. It was to prove that I am better than them, to prove that all these ideologies that I have in my head, they're not right. I can also be at the center. So I started really competing with the boys, when it came to class, and anytime I was above the boys, and anytime I was taking the first position and the boys were below me, I would feel really accomplished. But again, now this went on. I did my high school, I went to campus, the same thing, really subconscious at the time. And then now in young adulthood, again, I got into leadership positions in my capacity, and the same trait continued. Now, here I am, a young adult. Now I am in leadership. I am in leadership with men. Some are older than me, some are younger than me, and I am still feeling not worthy to be the leader, to be in that position. And I'm still trying to prove to them that I am worthy to be in that position. So I start doing things the way a man would do things, just so that I can show them that, what a man can do, a woman can do better. So I am doing things the way a man would do. And this became very frustrating at some point. I logged heads with a lot of them. Got really frustrating. I had to give up some positions because I was feeling not in alignment with who I am. So at some point I realized that trying to prove that what a man can do, a woman can do better was, it was coming from the best of intentions, but ironically, it was working against my ambition. It was working against my goals. It was working against what I wanted to be. At this time, I was headed towards 24. And if you can remember, the dream of this young girl was that at 24, she should be married, have a career life, and all these things. Now, as I was getting to 24, I went through a life changing moment. This started at around 23, if I would say. I went through a life changing moment where I would call it a wake up call. So I was feeling really empty at this time because I have been trying to prove to the men that I am also worthy. I have also been trying to prove to everyone else that a woman can do better. I have been subconsciously hating a woman, and so I'm not showing up as a woman. I am always trying to show up as a man. I'm always trying to use the tactics that a man would use. I have betrayed my emotions. But I was not in touch with my emotions at all because I had been told that women are emotional, and I had taken that as an insult. And I had viewed that me being an emotional being meant that I was weak. So in order for me not to be weak, I had betrayed all my emotions. I was not in touch with any of them. I was starting to feel really empty by the time I'm getting to 23. And then now again, the society, according to how I had looked at my life at, say, 24, I would be married. I was nowhere close to being married. So I started falling into depression. Coupled up with a lot of other things, but I was feeling really empty at this time. And one of the things that I would say was a wake up call is this time I was in a verbal fight with another lady. Well, cliche, we were fighting over a man, not one of my proudest moments at all. And during this verbal fight, I happened to call her, you woman. So I said it in Swahili, and I said, wewe mwanamke. So let us put a pin on that. So what led to this fight was that we were dating, or we were quote unquote in a relationship with the same man, and we had gotten to a point where we found out, we started off as being friends, and then at some point we started becoming enemies, and now we were literally fighting over this man, verbally. So let us get back to the pin. So I called this lady in one of our verbal fights, you woman, and she took it as an insult, and she actually tried to, come back as trying to show to ask me, why are you calling me a woman? Now, if I'm being really honest, when I called her you woman, I meant it as an insult. And so why I say this is a wake up call is because she mirrored what I was feeling inside when it came to how I view a woman. Because isn't it twisted for you to be a woman, call another woman a woman as an insult? So I started trying to figure out, how did I get to this point where I really hate being a woman, to the extent where I am calling someone a woman as an insult. And I started trying to figure out, what really does it mean to be a woman? Why do I hate it so much? What are the things that I have picked up all through my life with the patriarchy, with the idea of feminism that I had, with the way that I just carried myself, and why I started trying to figure out, why have I been trying to prove to the men that I am also a woman and I am also worthy. And then I realized that also at the center, because of the patriarchy and the idea of feminism that I had been consuming, at the center of my life was the men. So I started realizing that even in the leadership positions, yes, I was a good leader. I was qualified to be in that position, but internally I would always want to prove to the men. So at the center of my leadership was me trying to prove to the men that I can do this. So at the center of this leadership is the man. If I would look back now, I started looking back at my how I had done things generally in my academics, in everything. I remember even at some point I tried sports in my primary school years. I tried doing sports just because I wanted to prove to the boys in my class that I also can be as sporty as they were. Well, needless to say, that at that moment, during that, I think I took part in, maybe in a, I don't know what it's called, like a, not a marathon, but like a short race. I came in last. But again, I realized that I am doing a lot of things in my life with the center being the men, trying to prove to the men that, I can do this. So now it informs every other decision and choice that I make. I am trying to prove to this person that I also can lead. Because of that, then now it informs every other decision on how I am leading. Now, I started trying to identify all these things and to reconcile all these things, and to start being conscious about my life, about how I have been living, about the thoughts that go on in my mind, the choices that I make, the decisions that I make, what informs these choices. As these things started to come into my awareness and into my conscious mind, I knew that I had to unlearn a lot of the things that I had picked up as a kid. As a woman, I wanted to embrace being a woman, but just the story of me calling someone a woman as an insult, it meant that I needed to do a lot of internal work and to heal this little child who had thought of womanhood as less than, who had thought of womanhood of not worthy of being at the center of their own lives. I had to start learning myself. One of the things that I started doing was to embrace my menstrual cycle as a woman. Now, as I started this story, I told you that one of the things that I had learned from religion was that we were unclean. I would say the Bible had called us unclean. And so I had internalized these things. And so even when it came to my menstrual cycle, something so natural that happens to us every other month, I would always subconsciously think that I was unclean. So I started looking at my menstrual cycle as divine and just allowing myself to see it as what makes me a woman. What is it that biologically I would say that because I have this menstrual cycle, then I am a woman. And so I started unlearning some of the things that I had picked up, the uncleanliness bit of it, the society. I mean, when we were starting our periods very early on, the society, the women in the society and in the community would tell you, now this is, when they're giving you that womanly lecture, they would also always tell you that this is your dirt. They would call it dirt. In Swahili, they would call it uchafu. And so these are the things that I had picked up that were really working against how I wanted to view myself as a woman. And so I started learning the menstrual cycle. I started learning all these phases in the cycle. How do they affect me? When are my low energy days? When are my high energy days, how can I structure my life around it? And it started becoming very easy for me to structure my life around womanhood. So that was the first thing I started doing on my mission to be the center of my own life and to remove every other thing that I had made the center of my own life. The second thing that I started doing was embracing femininity. And this is one of the toughest things that I had to do. I don't know why. I still struggle with this here and there. It's still a work in progress, but I stopped doing things the way men do. Instead, I started doing things the way a woman would. So I stopped viewing a woman as a helper or as unworthy or as all these things that I had been taught to do. And I started learning that as a woman, I can show up in places as a woman, be it in the workplace, be it in the leadership positions. I did not have to show up as a leader and try to do things the way the men did. I started learning how to fit into these places as a woman. Then the next thing that I had to do was to accept that as women, yes, they said we are emotional. And I started to accept that, yes, I am emotional. But one of the things that I did was I said that if I was going to be called emotional, then I better be good at it. So I started taking classes on emotional intelligence. I did courses. I applied what I learned in theory to my life and I started building my EQ. I started getting in touch with my emotions, understanding what my emotions are, understanding how to navigate all these emotions and all these things. And I built my EQ up to a certain level, still a work in progress. I had to unlearn a lot of the things that I learned growing up for me to show up as a woman, for me to embrace being a woman. And even in the process of doing things, of doing all these things, I still realize that in this society, the society that we currently live in is still highly patriarchal. So one of the things that I was doing as I was embracing the woman in me was that, say, if I am trying to focus on maybe my work and I'm trying to get things done, then I would put my phone on maybe DND, do not disturb, or I would maybe switch it off depending on the amount of focus that I would need. And so I was getting into this stage where I am dating I would not say dating. I would say maybe it was the early talking stages of I was in the early talking stages with this man. And so one of the days I needed to focus and so I put my phone on do not disturb so that I can be focusing on my work. And coincidentally, he happened to call me this during this time. So once I was done with my work, I go back to my phone and I check it and I return the call. And the first thing he asks me is, aren't you picking your calls, my calls? And I say it's because it was on do not disturb because I'm focusing on my work. And he goes ahead to completely deny what I have said. He laughs very hysterically and he says, just say that you were with another man and that is why you did not pick up my call. So patriarchy still exists. Patriarchy still exists in our community. And it is one of the things that I cannot try to assume that it doesn't exist. But even in a highly patriarchal society, I am so intentional on embracing the woman that I am and on being the center of my life. I have come to a place where I acknowledge my strengths and acknowledge my weaknesses. I don't fight like a man these days the way I used to fight back in the day with my younger bro. I have acknowledged that one of the weaknesses is that physical strength is not my go to thing. And I have identified my strengths and how I contribute naturally to the society as a woman. On the other side of it, I acknowledge men. I also acknowledge their strengths, and I have gotten to a point where I allow them to also show up as men in their natural state, and as I allow myself to show up as a woman in my natural state. Sorry. If my brother was to call me a feminist today again, the way he called me during those teenhood years of mine, I would correct him and I would say, I am more of a womanist now. If I was to advocate for something currently, it would be for women to be at the center, whether it was during the activism or any other thing that they would be fighting for. Let them be at the center, learn themselves, embrace themselves, accept themselves as they are, and embrace the self-care, the emotional part of them, embrace how they are as a woman, embrace their femininity, do what they love, show up as women, be it in religious gatherings, be it at the workplace, be it at home. I mean, at this point in my life, I have realized that there is enough space for both men and women to coexist peacefully, each in their own natural affinity. I am still learning a lot, and every day carries with it a lesson to learn or something to unlearn. But all in all, I love my journey of womanhood. I love how far I've come into accepting and embracing womanism, embracing that I am a woman and accepting myself the way I am. So currently, my ambitions at 27, having embraced being a woman, the career ambitions still hold. The only thing that now, because as a kid, I had just thought of myself up to 24. Now, funny story, when I got to 24 and I had not achieved the career ladder or the career position that I had thought I would. I had not thought of getting married at 24. My world crumbled. The world of that little girl crumbled. And so I had to rebuild myself and figure out what now does my life look like past 24. Some of the things that I am actively looking towards, my career, of course, I am always building that as a woman, showing up as a woman, ensuring that even my tasks, I am centering them on the high energy days. That is when I am doing the high energy tasks. On the low energy days, I am giving myself more grace. The other thing that I am doing currently, I have a podcast where I talk to young adults so that it does not, I mean, what I went through, the whole idea of just having to unlearn a lot of things. In my podcast, I talk about the struggles of young adulting, the ways that we can coexist and we can coincide with adulting. Because, I mean, most of us think that adulting is a scam. I mean, the way we thought it would be, it's not really how it is. But now we beg the question now, yes, it is a scam. So what? So I am building a community in my podcast where I share all these things that I talk about. I still have the ambition to get married. It hasn't come yet, but it is still a big part of my ambition. But now I am not doing it because the society begs for me to do so. I am not rushing into things because the society if there is one thing I have learned up to where I'm at, is that the society can be the society and I can be myself living in this society. The society does not have to define my timelines as a woman. I mean, being a woman at my age, I can confidently tell you that the conversations of when are you getting married? Are you bringing us somebody? I can say the past month I was up country and I had this talk with my auntie, and she was outrightly telling me that at 27 I am too old and I should be married. So being married is an ambition that I have, and it will happen in its own timing. One of the things that I'm not going to do, I did not take the men out of the center of my life to let society be at the center of my life. So I am still very ambitious, and I hope to really achieve great things as a woman.
Catch more African stories in the next episode of Legally Clueless. First and foremost, I just have to say a huge thank you to Faith for being so open and vulnerable with us and just kind of like carrying us through her journey of unlearning, even at times calling herself out for things she held to be truths and wondering why the heck did she think that was true, etc. So interesting. And I think the process, whether you agree with her new truths or her old truths, etc., I think the process of unlearning is proof to me that you're pretty self-aware, and I love self-aware people. In fact, I realized the 3 closest people to me in my life right now are the most self-aware people in my life. And the conversations we have, I cannot have those conversations with anyone else. So first and foremost, Faith, I have to just say, like, kudos to the level of self-awareness that you have, and you continue to grow at your age even. And the first thing I'll say is just be graceful with yourself. You know, sometimes women who hold views that are in line with things the patriarchy upholds get so much hate. And I think back in the day, I used to also be quite angry at women who upheld truths that maybe suppressed other women. But over the years, I've remembered, because it's like I forgot back in the day. Over the years, I've remembered that we didn't grow up in a vacuum. We grew up in this same patriarchal society. So there are some oppressive truths that our minds, or that we are hanging on to, that we probably don't know until we know, you know, and it takes time and courage to unlearn them. I was telling someone pretty close to me yesterday about how when I was younger, because I didn't do a lot of the things that traditionally African women would do, you know what I mean? So like, of course you don't know what I mean because I haven't told you, but like, I wouldn't be in the kitchen with the girls during like a family function, or when we're in shags, which is our ancestral home. I would maybe be hanging out with the guys. And my mom used to hang out with the guys, you know what I mean? And I don't enjoy cooking, not even for one person. So now if you're more than 10, please. It ain't happening. And so I do know an aunt has said to me in the past, like, oh, back in the day, like, oh, it's like you can only get married to a white person, right? And I kind of was a bit conflicted. It stayed with me for so many years. I was just like, what the heck does this mean? And I also remember back then having like a feeling of, oh, wait, does this mean I'm better? You know what I mean? And it's just because you've grown up in a society that places certain truths in your head. And the more you learn, the more you call out some of these truths that maybe are lying dormant within you. So be graceful with yourself. You didn't grow up in a vacuum. I also think a lot of systems benefit men only. So you might stumble into saying, well, if I move like a man to get ahead, this is just me manipulating the system to make it. It's not something that I've done, so I don't even know if it works or if it doesn't, you know what I mean? Because industries are also different, spaces are also different. I've never had to do that. But if you find yourself morphing into that, again, be graceful with yourself, because you are not growing up or living in a vacuum. You are living in a space where it's constantly in your face that if you have what society deems to be more masculine traits, or if you play the game in a certain way, then you get ahead. You know what I mean? So you might find yourself stumbling into, quote unquote, acting like a man. Or even when you discover that, don't shit on yourself. Just be graceful. Again, you did not grow up and you are not living in a vacuum. And there are a lot of systems that benefit men only. I recently saw this tweet that was asking women in their 30s what advice would they give women in their 20s. And immediately the advice that came into my head was decenter men in your life. Just remove them from the center. It just felt like when we were growing up, when I was growing up, and it's still the case now to some extent, everything was rounded off to you getting a man, you know, so you were learning certain skills. So for example, even cooking, back to it as an example, if you ask me, there is a huge percentage of it that is a survival skill. Even me who hates it understands that I need to know how to cook because it's a survival skill. So I do know how to cook. I just don't enjoy cooking. But you're taught how to cook because then you can cook for a man. You know what I mean? So like, it just felt like everything was centered around the man. Like, you shouldn't be too much of this because you'll chase men away, or you shouldn't dress like this because then it's not going to be attractive to men. So I feel like it's so important to decenter men in your life, because then you create space for you to not only meet yourself deeply, which means decenter everyone, not only men, like decenter everyone, make you the center of everything so you can really meet yourself and understand who you are and what your goals and ambitions are. But also, I feel like when you do this and you start to fall in love with yourself and you start to do activities that bring you joy and be in spaces that bring you joy, you then meet your partner, love, or soulmate effortlessly and organically, not like in this quest of, I'm going to do this because this brings a man. No, I feel like when you're on that journey of falling in love with yourself and finding yourself, you find and stumble onto like-minded people, and it's more beautiful. In fact, I was having a conversation with two of my friends this past weekend, and I was just talking about how the process of meeting the person you love, or the person who is your soulmate, we shouldn't take away the magic from that by like plotting and planning. We should let the magical things remain magical, and so decenter men in your life. I loved when she talks about the menstrual cycle because it's something that I have never understood. I do remember being told in the past about how I couldn't go to a temple because I was on my period. My first question was, who's the person who's going to check? You know what I mean? Like, is there somebody whose job it is to check? Because who will know? That's one. Number two, in your religion, whichever God it is that you subscribe to, etc., but is the creator of all things, they created you in a certain way as a woman, which includes your menstrual cycle. So how can they be the same person to turn around and say, oh, you are not clean enough to be in my presence because you have this monthly thing? I don't get it. And then it's tied to you being able to carry life, another expectation that is put out by society for every woman. So like, you say this thing is unclean, but it's the only thing that can make me do what you say I'm here to do. You know what I mean? It's just like, what in the world? And it just creates so much shame. It means we don't talk about our periods loudly, which means we don't even talk about when there's issues until it's too late. So it's really like a cycle of madness. How we view our menstrual cycles, if you ask me. I just don't get it. I don't get it at all. I remember recently, or was it sometime last year, I was with this guy who happens to be super close to me. And this was the first time this had ever happened. My period came early and I did not have any pads. I used pads and I was at his house. It was going to midnight. And this is me who's pretty independent in my thinking and very like, settled in my womanhood. But I started freaking out. And this is somebody I've known for years, right? And so I call out to him from his room and he's downstairs and I'm like, I'm having a female crisis or some shit like that. I said something so stupid. And he's just like, okay, what's happening? And I say, my period has started, so you need to go out and get me pads. He's like, okay, just tell me which ones to get. He was very cool about it, as anybody should be, because this is not something strange. I was the one who was panicking, and so he drove out. As soon as he drove out, I called my best friend. I'm like, fuck, you'll not believe what happened. And she's like, hey, that's all right. Like, relax. And he came back and he brought me candy and like pads and painkillers. And so I remember reflecting on that and just being like, why did I feel ashamed? Why did I feel like, oh, I've not planned myself properly or whatever? First and foremost, they came early. There's no amount of planning that prepares you for that shit. And secondly, there is nothing shameful about my period. I should be able to talk about it. And fast forward to, I think last week, I did have a bit of like a health scare. I started bleeding around the same person. And I had like a bit of a moment where I started thinking, oh, maybe I should just let them leave and not tell them this is what's happening. And then I can just solve it myself. But I snapped back into my senses because, again, I'm very comfortable in my womanhood right now, even when it's a crisis like that, because this was like heavy flow out of the blue, so it was a bit scary. Yeah, I just literally told him, this is happening. I don't know why, blah, blah. And so the next day we went to hospital. But I've started to, just like Faith, take away all the shame from my period and my menstrual cycle and just understand, yes, it can be inconveniencing. I'm not gonna lie about that bit, because there are bits where you're just like, man, this is not the sex episode, so like all I'll say is, man, it can be inconveniencing, but it's beautiful, I think, and it's wonderful. Even like last week when I went to hospital, just learning from my gyna the different things happening inside me at the time, I was just like, wow, like my body is fascinating. It's quite magical. So yeah, I loved when Faith talked about that. I also think that we should own the power to define what femininity looks like for you as an individual. I think sometimes gender roles, gender expectations, gender definitions, etc., forget the individual. So for example, I'm telling you I don't like cooking. That doesn't make me less of a woman. Or a woman who says they don't ever want kids, that doesn't make them less of a woman. Or a woman who does a sport that, let's say, is very masculine presenting as per society's lens, that doesn't mean they're less of a, you know what I mean? So you decide what femininity looks like for you and give yourself room to have it evolve. I think I went from being, in my younger days, very tomboyish to very, but even then, that wasn't real me. It was around the time of me getting raped. And so I think there was a bit of like, not wanting to draw attention to myself, to then realizing I loved makeup and I loved dressing up in fashion, and I still do to date, to covering up my scars, so back to tomboy, but it wasn't really mine, it was like hiding, to being in an era where I was very angry and just very angry, understandably as a woman, but I was very angry. And I think I'm now in the softest era I've ever been in, maybe because I'm moving from surviving to just being open to love and good things and letting those that love me, men included. And so I feel very soft. I feel, the softest I've ever been. Again, that doesn't mean I've let go of any truths I had around femininity or whatever. It just means that in my definition of femininity, it allows me to evolve as a human and as a woman, you know? I love this story. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Drop them our way in the comment section, wherever you're listening to this episode from, or on our Instagram. We're at Legally Clueless Africa. There's a link to it in the show notes. And if, like Faith, you want to share your story with us, you're African, you have a story, we want to hear it. We have new correspondence, so we're recording stories all year round. All you have to do is, in the show notes, fill out our storyteller form and we will get back to you. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. You're African, you have a story, we want to hear it. And as we close this episode, next week, I'll be having a deep convo on emotions with one of my best friends who happens to be a top DJ in Kenya. I love him so much, and I'm so excited to share his madness with you. So make sure you're here for that episode. It'll be one for the books. Until then, I'm sending you so much love, so much light, and so much courage for you to unlearn and to define who you are for yourself. As the song of the week says, fuck society. That's it for this episode of Legally Clueless. You can share this podcast with your friends. You can keep it for yourself. I'm not judging. Just make sure you're here next week for the next episode.